So in response to the war that is now broken out in the Middle East, Israel is relentlessly bombing Gaza as we speak and doing a siege of Gaza. Ben Shapiro and Andrew Tate went to war over it, pun intended, on Twitter. So now the reason why this is interesting, of course, Ben has been relentlessly pro-Israel, and Andrew Tate, at some point he converted to Islam, and so he's, I guess, more sympathetic to the Palestinians. So there's also, sort of a religious angle to this as well that's playing into their positions. Ben Shapiro responded to this. This guy, Mario Nawfal, has been following everything and tweeting updates to what's happening in the war. And he said, just in, the UN special rapporteur, I never know how to pronounce that, by the way. I know, that's sad, I should. The UN Special Rapporteur for Human Rights in Palestine, quote, "We are horrified by what is happening and we call for a truce." So that's the UN saying, hey man, there's a lot of innocent people getting bombed here and a lot of apartment buildings being destroyed and mosques and marketplaces, etc., etc. Like even UN safe zones have been bombed. Well, Ben Shapiro quote tweets it and says, and they can fuck right off. So in other words, no peace, not interested in the slightest in peace. This is going to keep happening. Okay, so Andrew Tate responds, Mr. Tough Guy, let me assure you, as someone who does his own fighting, as opposed to excitedly encouraging others to do it for him while sitting at home on a comfy chair, peace is always worth a conversation. Andrew Tate saying, hey, maybe de-escalation is a good idea, especially with massive numbers of civilians being killed on both sides. There was massive numbers when Hamas invaded Israel and started gunning down civilians all over the place. And there's massive numbers of civilian casualties now with the Israeli bombing campaign. Well, Ben Shapiro claps back. Let me assure you, as someone who has not pimped women and bragged about it, that morality requires that those who rape women and kidnap children must be eradicated, not negotiated with. So bringing up Andrew Tate's multiple criminal charges where he's brought up on basically pimping out women, raping women, etc., throwing that right back in his face. He was keeping that up his sleeve. Now, it's so funny because Ben Shapiro previously, for a long time, he played like footsies with the manosphere people and the red pill people. Like, oh, they're really popular. Maybe I can get in on some of that popularity and largely agree with them, but disagree around the edges. And then now it's like, since it's over the issue of Israel-Palestine, he's like, no! And you're a rapist and you're a pimp and you pimp women out. Okay, so look, what's the reality here? The reality here is very simple. When Ben Shapiro says this, that, hey, the people who rape women and kidnap children, they need to be eradicated, not negotiated with. Yeah, the problem here, Ben, is that's not who you're eradicating. That's not who you're eradicating. Now, the Israeli government is killing innocent civilians. Nearly half of the population of Gaza is children under the age of 15. There's so many children there. There's so many women there. There's so many innocent civilians there. 50% of Gazans want a two-state solution along the 1967 borders. They would take that deal. 62% want a ceasefire. Hamas won an election all the way back in like 2005, and they've been dictatorial ever since, and they just hold on to power. They are not representative of all Palestinians, but Ben Shapiro's thinking is that kind of thinking. So, you got to eradicate the people who would kidnap children and rape women and all that stuff. And it's like, look, if the response from the Israeli government is, we're going to use surgical precision and go after the people who perpetrated this terrorism and these crimes, I don't think anybody would disagree with that. Very, very few people would disagree with that. That'd be like over 80% support. But that is not what they're doing, Ben. What they're doing is, now this is like the 12th time I've shown this, the Israeli defense minister said the other day, quote, there will be no electricity, no food, no fuel. We are fighting human animals and we will act accordingly. So in other words, do a medieval siege and do collective punishment against 2.3 million people. That's the response. Another response is this. Their power station already stopped working, so nobody in Gaza has any electricity. 180,000 Palestinians heeded Israel's warnings when they said, hey, get out of there. Even though they have nowhere to go, they went to what they thought was the safest place, which is the UN shelters. And guess what? A UN shelter was directly hit and 5 others were damaged. And so look, the problem with what Ben Shapiro was saying here is very simple. He's using the same logic as the evil terrorists in Hamas who attacked innocent civilians. The idea from Hamas is like, hey man, they're guilty enough. If they're women, if they're children, if they're civilians, we say, doesn't matter. In our mind, you're all illegal settlers and you're all evil Jews. This is Hamas's logic, collective punishment, right? I make no distinction between somebody who's not an illegal settler, not an IDF member, somebody who's a woman who's a child, and somebody who is those things. That's what they did, and Ben's like, I would like to use that same logic and say all Palestinians are as guilty as the worst terrorist in Hamas. And so, look, this is, what he did here is basically just pivoted to, I'm going to attack Andrew Tate on a weakness, which is that he's a criminal, and he's a rapist, and the worst person in the world could say the sky is blue, and the sky is blue, right? Doesn't make it untrue because a really bad person or a criminal said it. It's still accurate. And so when he says, hey, maybe a conversation for peace is the right thing since all these civilians are dying, that's the correct response. And you don't just get to pivot to another issue and then act like the collective punishment is necessary given the rampant number of civilian casualties. So look, I mean, what's driven me crazy in this debate and in this conversation is very simple. And I'm sure all you guys feel the same thing too. It's like the one moral constant that everybody who's reasonable needs to agree to is civilians are off the table. If you don't agree to that, then you're my enemy. I disagree with you completely. You have to agree to that basic principle. Innocent civilians are off the table. And what you're seeing here is just rabid, crazed freaks all over the place making insane arguments for collective punishment and sectarianism and tribalism on both sides. From that protest in Sydney, Australia, where they were chanting, gas the Jews, to the protest in New York, where they were saying, kill every Palestinian, to the Israeli official in the Knesset who said, nuke Gaza, to the medieval siege, to people who say, well, what did you expect? What Hamas did, nothing wrong with it, is decolonization. What'd you expect? Of course it was going to get messy. Wrong. They've set back the movement for Palestinian freedom and Palestinian rights, and any reasonable person can acknowledge that. And this horrific, same mindset from Ben Shapiro, collective punishment, is the heart of the problem. And so, the girls are fighting on Twitter, man. The girls are fighting on Twitter. And, nothing is going to move Ben Shapiro on this issue. Because remember, and I'll end on this point, this is a guy who wrote, during the peak of the Iraq War, I don't care about civilian casualties. I don't. It's just collateral damage. It's irrelevant to me. Now, he has since said, oh, I disavow, that was one of my worst articles. He's since said, I changed my mind on that. That was wrong. But the way he's talking now, he clearly did not change his mind. Because he's okay with massive numbers of civilians being killed on the Palestinian side for retribution and revenge and vengeance for the civilians killed on the Israeli side. It's not good. Hey, y'all, do me a favor and like and subscribe. It helps out big time in the algorithm. Click the bell as well for notifications when videos drop. And watch that video on screen right now. You know you want to.